The full moon cast an eerie glow across the abandoned mining town, its pale light failing to pierce the thick fog that had rolled in. Jake cut the engine of his battered old truck, leaving an ominous silence hanging over the ghostly collection of decaying buildings. His girlfriend Emily shivered against the sudden chill that descended as they stepped onto the rutted dirt road. Once a thriving hub of feverish gold rush activity, the town had become a hollow shell after the last nuggets were extracted 50 years ago. Emily felt like she had passed through some portal into the past. The saloon doors creaked on rusted hinges, faded wanted posters clung to peeled wood sidings, a moth-eaten sheriff's hat rested eternally atop a skeletal remain. It was a place frozen in time, the people long gone. "This place gives me the creeps," Emily muttered, moving closer to Jake as they continued down the main street. Their footsteps echoed against buckled pavement overgrown with weeds erupting through cracks. The only other sound was the lonely whistling of wind through broken windows. Nothing living stirred in this ghost town relic. As the young couple passed beneath the weathered sign reading Eternal Fortune EST 1872, something shifted in the darkness. Ancient forces dormant for decades were roused by fresh blood and a land curse by misfortune and greed long ago. "Come check this out, Em. Looks like the old mine lift," Jake said, pulling back a tarp to reveal rusted metal and fraying ropes. Emily eyed the crumbling wooden beams sunk into the earth, remnants of shafts allowing endless streams of gold-hungry men underground every day for years. Now only gloomy silence filled the abandoned mine, the rich seams long tapped out. The dusty tools and equipment had been left to be reclaimed by creeping vines and erosion. As the couple poked around the ruins, Emily couldn't help but imagine the greed-crazed glint in long-dead miners' eyes when chunks of precious ore emerged from below. Kicking through a mound of rubble near a cave-in, Jake uncovered a weathered leather-bound book. "Would you look at this? It's practically an antique," he remarked. Emily turned the brill-yellowed pages, struggling to make out the faded scribblings. Faint sketches depicted men celebrating in the very saloon they passed earlier with newly minted coins spilling from their grasp. One miner stood apart in the background, worry lines etched under haunting eyes. "This must be some old prospector's journal," Emily mused. She could just decipher later entries describing the bone-pick mine's rapid decline as the last precious scraps were carted out by disappointed men who had staked everything on the boomtown. The final page contained a foreboding passage. "Now that the gold has left this cursed place, I pray its hidden sins and tragic legacy remain buried beneath the dirt. But I fear the ghosts of the past may someday rise again." A shiver ran down Emily's spine that had nothing to do with the night chill. What secrets still lingered in the shadows of this ghost town? Clutching Jake's arm. "Did you hear that?" she whispered sharply. Jake shook his head, but his nonchalance faded as soon the sound came again, a faint whisper, its source impossible to pinpoint. It seemed to echo both from the gaping mine entrance and the empty buildings surrounding them. Emily strained her ears, skin prickling. The ethereal murmuring was almost like anguished voices intermingling and overlapping. Their pleas too distorted to interpret. She watched Jake slowly turn, eyes wide as he also struggled to track the odd whispers. They seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere all at once. "We should get out of here." Emily trailed off as a louder wail pierced the oppressive silence. Her breath caught at the clarity of its heart-wrenching agony and despair. The crisis peaked and just as quickly faded, leaving no doubt as to its unnatural origins. Jake backed them slowly away from the looming mouth of the mine, one arm extended as if to ward off unseen forces. Even his usual bravado was shaken. The empty facades of desiccated buildings appeared more menacing now, gaps of broken beams and windows like the soulless eyes and mouths of skulls. The mournful whispers returned, infusing the space between structures. Emily's mind spun wild tales of ghosts reliving an age-old tragedy, perhaps trying to warn away the living. She couldn't shake the sense they'd stumbled into a precarious limbo between eras, where the present was blurring with the past. Each creak and groan of the settlement took on new meaning as the shadows themselves seemed to watch. Emily's breath halted in her throat as she spotted shapes materializing within the ruins, fleeting forms floating over crumbled foundations, then vanishing as quickly as they came. She clutched Jake's arm with white knuckles, unable to tear her eyes away from the emerging apparitions. Faces of bearded men emerged from plumes of ethereal mist, their pickaxes swinging intently. Though their ghostly features showed signs of advanced age and weariness, the phantom miners attacked deposits of glimmering veins only they could see with feverish gusto. The echo of metal against stone reverberated as loudly as a real blow inside Emily's pounding skull. "It's like a snapshot back in time, when the gold rush was in full swing," Jake observed in an odd whisper. Indeed, the specters moved with single-minded drive, oblivious to all except the phantom oars summoning them from beyond the grave. Their visages betrayed not joy over fortune struck, but haunted obsession. A stooped figure in antiquated leather gear strode directly through Jake toward a minecart brimming with shimmering dust. The phantom payload passed effortlessly through the tracks and supports too decayed now to bear any real weight. Emily realized with simultaneous wonder and dread that they were witnessing the tragic past's shadow imprinted on this area by intense suffering. She had heard tales of such residual hauntings, harmless replays of dramatic moments endlessly reenacting. But knowing the cause did little to combat her primal instinct to flee from the unnatural sight. Jake seemed likewise enthralled and unnerved by the resurrected history swirling around them. He gently guided Emily backward even as his eyes remained locked on the long-dead men carrying out their endless tasks oblivious to the presence of the living. As Jake and Emily slowly retreated from the phantom mine activity, the unmistakable tinkling of honky-tonk piano echoed from deeper within the ghost town. They shared a stunned glance. Somehow the long-abandoned local watering hole had come alive with music and raucous laughter from unseen revelers. Emboldened by curiosity, the couple crossed the ramshackle porch as dusty batwing doors creaked open invitingly. Inside the dim saloon, tables lay upturned amidst shattered glass and other debris. But despite the derelict appearance, Emily detected tobacco smoke and stale perfume clinging to the air. The piano's mirthful tempo beckoned from the shadows. As they approached the candlelit stage, the keys depressed rhythmically of their own accord while spectral chuckles echoed from the rafters. Yet not a soul could be seen enjoying the haunting honky-tonk performance. Jake leaned in examining the intricate woodwork adorning the dusty bar top while Emily dared approach the antique mirror behind the counter. Her breath caught at the briefest glimpse of a pale, gaunt face peering back before it vanished like a morning mirage. The entity's hollow yet keenly intelligent eyes and that split-second reflection chilled her to the core. She gripped Jake's shoulder, suddenly desperate to leave despite her raging curiosity. This living ghost town no longer felt merely an intriguing window to the past but a potential trap set by lingering forces. As if reading her thoughts, Jake suggested making their way gingerly toward the exit. But the unseen pianist transitioned abruptly to a darker, more ominous melody. All phantom merriment evaporated, leaving only a feeling of foreboding warning. The couple froze like rabbits catching scent of a nearby fox as the saloon doors slammed shut. Heart pounding, Emily glanced around the now foreboding saloon for an escape route. She spotted a slender beam of moonlight hinting at a rear exit. Grabbing Jake's hand, they rushed past the possessed piano towards the back rooms. Rotting floorboards groaned under their footsteps. They found themselves in cramped living quarters that must have belonged to the saloonkeeper back in the gold rush heyday. Fighting claustrophobia, Emily squeezed between moth-eaten curtains into a tiny space housing a disheveled desk and bed frame. Grimy glass photo frames glinted from the dust-laden surface. Hands trembling, Emily lifted one frame into a shaft of light. A smiling family posed before the saloon back when it thrived, a mother and son beaming proudly beside a stern-eyed man in an apron she assumed was the proprietor. More snapshots revealed similar joyful images, the boy grown older operating mining equipment, the mother serving grinning patrons. But the final frame made Emily gasp. It captured the burned-out skeletons of several buildings, including what remained of the saloon. Smack in the foreground lay two sheet-covered bodies. Even without seeing their faces, Emily intrinsically understood she was viewing the proprietor's wife and son. "My God," Jake muttered, having uncovered the old prospector's journal again. He aimed his flashlight at the damning final entry, "I cannot bear the sight of this place any longer." If refusing that demon Saxon's crooked deal makes me responsible for the tragedy that befell Maggie and Jeremiah, then may Providence damn me." The cryptic words deepened the pall over the room. Just what sinister bargaining had happened here leading to such a fatal catastrophe? Emily fought the urge to flee blindly from this cursed tragedy. But she could not deny now they stirred up more than ghosts here. There were secrets longing to be unearthed that perhaps should remain forever buried. Emily backed slowly from the tragic artifacts as children's playful laughter drifted hauntingly through the room's musty stillness. She turned to Jake, raw unease reflected in his features at the out-of-place sound. Emily's skin prickled with goosebumps against the rising chill. As they crept from the cramped quarters, the unmistakable giggles and shouts of youth at play permeated the ghost town. Fleeting movements flashed in Emily's periphery, only catching full sight of the entities would reveal empty space. Like a gruesome game of hide and seek, the phantom children flickered briefly into view then vanished before Emily's brain could fully register their details. But the impressions left behind told enough of their traumatic fates: scorched pinafores, soot-stained cheeks, singed hair. Emily recoiled as a little girl momentarily materialized before her, hollow-eyed with mouth open wide in a silent yet jubilant squeal. The apparition blinked out faster than a camera flash, leaving Emily breathless. She glimpsed Jake's own shocked expression as he too spotted youthful specters engaged in play, blissfully unaware of their deathly condition. The unrestrained joy clashed grotesquely with the hints of tiny forms reduced to charred husks. As Emily grasped for an explanation, the prospector's disturbing references to tragedy loomed large again. She visualized an explosive mind collapse, or even deliberately set blaze. Had greedy ambitions brought fiery judgment down upon the heads of innocents? The innocent spirits frolicked on, oblivious to the dark machinations that perhaps cut their young lives tragically short. Leaving the phantom children to their macabre games, Jake and Emily crept towards a cluster of crumbling homes on the settlement's outskirts that had clearly housed mining families. Like the youthful ghosts, lingering signs of domesticity contrasted the present dilapidation. Emily detected faint sizzling and smelled cooked meat wafting from a ramshackle shack. But rather than the cozy haven such scents usually promised, an atmosphere of sorrow permeated the abandoned shelter. Through gaps in powdery curtains they spied the translucent form of a woman tending a spectral stew pot, oblivious to her cold and desolate surroundings. Next door, as if glimpsing a life through a delicate soap bubble, they witnessed a distressed gentleman pacing rapidly in the shadows of a bygone parlor. His ghostly arms clenched and unclenched repeatedly around some phantom missive bearing tragic news. By his ranting mutters, Emily deduced he was one left behind trying futilely to make sense of terrible loss. In the disintegrating nursery, shimmering remnants of laughter and coos lingered though its physical source had long decayed. The traces of happy memories that likely sustained the spirits now only amplified the tragedy of dreams destroyed. Together with the diary's reference to lives destroyed over mining ambitions, the scenes hinted at families torn apart by cruel misfortune. Had calamity in the risky tunnels left wives widowed and children fatherless in this wasteland populated by the relics of their scattered kin? Emily's heart ached picturing the lingering pain that kept loved ones clinging to this weighing station between worlds. Emily shuddered against the deepening chill that had settled around the grieving household specters. As she and Jake hastened their retreat, Emily noticed wisps of vapor accompanying her quickened breaths. She rubbed her arms briskly only to confront gooseflesh. An unnatural cold spot had materialized right where they stood. Jake's flashlight abruptly cut out, leaving them in moonglow-limned darkness. He smacked it several times before the beam reappeared, weaker than before. As they maneuvered the weed-split walkways, Emily detected shapes sliding through the edges of light. Stones and debris rolled of their own momentum. The subtle movements left her muscles tensed, unsure what might dart out next. Windows they passed reflected their silhouettes distorted somehow, looming larger and overlapping with countless others shifting just out of sight. Though the external details seemed familiar, the ominous ambience signaled they were far from welcome observers. An unspoken consensus formed between her and Jake: they were being watched. As they hastened toward the truck, eager for escape, Emily glimpsed the antique mirror from the saloon in a debris pile. Their reflections were visible for a split second before being engulfed in darkness as the glass spontaneously fractured, then lay still once more. Meeting Jake's taut gaze confirmed it. Whatever dwelled in this forsaken place was toying with them now. Emily nearly collapsed with relief at the sight of Jake's truck ahead. But an anguished scream of splintering timber and crushing rock halted her stride. She whirled to face the mine, pulse racing. The temperature plunged frigid and the air pressure spiked painfully in her ears. She was overtaken by vertigo. This felt akin to being at the epicenter of some catastrophic event horizon. Phantom dust choked her nostrils and blinded her gaze. In her swimming sight, dozens of ghostly miners frantically bolted towards town, only to disappear into the foggy lens obscuring the modern-day abandonment. Just as quickly, the scene seemed to rewind as hard hat forms reassembled at the maw of the mine, then were blown back by plumes of earth erupting forth. Emily grasped at Jake through the time slippage assaulting her equilibrium. Together they witnessed the full tragic replay, mine supports splintering under raging fires, Venus jewels of ore exploding from deep lodes into a cyclone of debris and bodies. The unprepared souls were drowned under lethal currents of soil. Just as suddenly the vivid glimpse to the past evaporated, leaving the remains shrouded in empty silence once more. Gasping against the violent temporal flux, Emily felt certain they had peered directly into the epical disaster that doomed the settlement. The tortured spirits were still soaked in those petrifying moments, calling outsiders to share their trauma. This was no quaint historical diorama, but the cycling epicenter of restless souls still seeking closure after all these years. Adrenaline flooded Emily's veins as her fight or flight response kicked into high gear. This was no longer mere witnessing of past horrors. They were under attack from forces determined to anchor them to the tragedy replaying endlessly in this valley. She sprinted for the truck behind Jake, boots slipping on skeletal remains of structures grasping up through long grass. Heart and throat, she felt ghostly hands brush her ankles, then grip firmly around both calves, nearly pitching her forward. Glancing back, she spotted lifeless arms protruding from false fronts and dirt piles that moments earlier had presented only as harmless detritus. Frigid, uncanny strength tugged fiercely at her legs before Jake was able to rip her free. They took off running, no longer unnerved by the supernatural assault, but driven by mortal terror to outrace whatever sought to claim fresh vessels. Barreling over the powdery earth, they hurdled gaps and raised planks precariously bridging abandoned mine shafts. Emily imagined anguished howls arising with reawakened hunger from below at their narrow escape. At long last, Jake's beloved truck loomed ahead, doors hanging open like sanctuary arms beckoning salvation. Just as they collapsed panting safely inside, a deafening crack resounded. Snake-like tendrils burst through the soil, coiling up and around the truck's chassis, seeking vulnerable flesh and bone. Jake gunned the defiant engine as the ghost town's burgeoning wrath shook the outskirts. Love and life propelling them forward, the couple burst from the settlement's ensnaring clutches out into the free night. Jake gripped the wheel white-knuckled as the mining settlement disappeared from view in the dust-choked rear window. Their chests heaved, lungs burning both from panic sprint and belated exhilaration at still occupying the land of the living. As the adrenaline ebbed, chills racked Emily's frame at the recollection of ghostly limbs grappling hungrily from the disturbed earth. Jake too shivered, less from cold than the understanding they'd barely evaded the vortex of time and tragedy swirling eternally within that lost outpost. Exhaustion finally claimed them once the familiar lights of Tedford Springs appeared on the horizon. Jake pulled off the lonely road so they could properly collect themselves before braving curious glances. As he flipped on the cab light, Emily spotted the aged diary resting open precisely to a newly scripted passage that inexplicably closed. At long last, witnesses have honored our tales so they may share word of what befell this place beyond simply legend. We cannot rest easy, but your compassion has granted us solace. Emily brushed her fingers over the elegant, archaic script with bittersweet gratitude and sadness. By some twist of fate, they'd been conduits to at last unearth the truth behind sinister secrets that doomed the settlement. She only prayed the knowledge might offer the trapped souls passage to peace and brighter pastures at long last. For now, she and Jake could carry their stories into the new millennium.